with another episode of the BAT podcast. This is Randy Nonnenberg here, and I'm joined by Howard Swig. Hey, Howard.
Good afternoon. I'm excited for this one today.
Yeah, we got a really good one today with a very interesting guest. We have Mr. Nick Ellis, who is the executive director of the RPM Foundation. You may not know the RPM Foundation, or you may have heard of it a bunch in the collector space. They are doing some very interesting things around the future of the hobby. We get asked at BAT all the time. Howard will echo this. We get asked all the time of, where is the hobby going in terms of all these old cars? Who's going to work on them? Who's going to restore them? Who's going to run these museums? Modern classics. Who's going to work on those cars from the 80s and 90s after those cars are 30 and 40 years old? And what are young people doing in the space? And Nick is an expert with that. The RPM Foundation, we're going to have him lay out what they're up to. And that is an organization that we respect and are very interested to hear from. So Mr. Ellis, thank you for joining us.
Randy, Howard, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, so let's dive right in. Obviously, the BAT community touches all sorts of interesting vehicles in the U.S. and internationally. And can you just give us and the audience a basic overview of RPM Foundation and what you guys are up to?
Sure, yeah. So the RPM Foundation, RPM stands for Restoration, Preservation, and Mentorship. And what we're doing is we're looking at that skilled trade shortage that is affecting the nation as a whole, but specifically vehicle restoration and preservation. And this is, we consider this to be such an important part of our culture. You've got two different kinds of people who look at vehicles as getting from point A to point B, and then people who really drive their vehicles because they love them. They're an avenue of expression. They're a way of recreation. They appreciate design and technology. All of that comes together to create a culture. And I doubt I'm saying anything that you guys or anybody listening to this podcast doesn't already believe. So I know I'm preaching to the choir on that. But the big concern is, that push in the 70s and 80s towards everybody completing a 4-year college degree has resulted in this very serious skilled trade shortage in the U.S. And that's affecting restoration and preservation particularly because there's over 3,000 restoration shops in the U.S. And when you look at restoration instruction at the post-secondary level, you're looking at maybe 100 students that are coming out of those programs per year. So, when you see that epidemic of shop owners retiring, closing up shop, they've got nobody to take over for them. That's the reason right there. There's not nearly enough new talent coming into the pipeline. And it's affecting vehicle restoration and preservation harder than the other trades. Because if you look at automotive technology and collision repair, you've got industry associations supporting those. They invest in educational programs. You've got the industry itself developing internships and apprenticeships, and those populate their workforce. They keep the dealerships fully staffed. Restoration and preservation, that's a collection of small businesses that spread out across the country with little to no connective tissue between them. So that's where the RPM Foundation comes in. We consider vehicle culture to be an important enough part of our identity as a people that we need to keep that alive. We need to have a strong workforce of skilled craftspeople to keep those vehicles on the road and keep the culture going. So we take a multi-tiered approach to combating the skilled trade shortage. We're primarily known as a grant funding organization. We support schools at the post-secondary level with scholarship funding. We fund internships for students to round out their education. We support high schools to take on restoration projects with parts and materials funding. We give them equipment and tools too. And we fund programs that encourage youth participation in collector car culture. But we're also launching programs of our own. We've got an apprenticeship program that we're building, what we're calling the Endangered Skills Program. We're working with partners to bring programs to concours and different events. We just partnered with the Great Race on their X Cup division. And, Bring a Trailer actually helped us out when we had our Sonoma Speed. We participated in the Sonoma Speed Festival. You guys hosted an auction for us, a hotel stay, tickets to the Sonoma Speed Festival, lunch with Lynn St. James, who's an RPM ambassador, and exhibition laps in a 62 Ferrari 250 GTO. And that brought in almost $9,000 to help our organization. So we're doing a lot of different things. I'd love to talk to them, speak to each one of those individually, but that's the overview of the RPM Foundation. We do whatever we can to engage the next generation in becoming a part of the skilled labor workforce that is going to keep this industry alive.
That's a fantastic overview. And yeah, we were really excited to be involved with you guys for that event where we auctioned off that experience. How long has RPM been around? Is this a brand new phenomenon, or has this been around for a long time?
It's been around in different forms since 2005. We were actually started by Hagerty. We began as the Collectors Foundation. And after a few years of operating as the Collectors Foundation, it got to the size that Hagerty wanted to hand it off to LeMay America's Car Museum in Tacoma. So it was rebranded at that point as the Hagerty Education Program, and LeMay America's Car Museum administered it. When it grew to the point where we needed to be a separate entity, it was spun off into the RPM Foundation. And now RPM Foundation, LeMay America's Car Museum, and America on Wheels Museum are all underneath the umbrella of America's Automotive Trust. And America's Automotive Trust brings together like-minded nonprofits to share resources and to collaborate on their approach. So all of these organizations underneath the umbrella of America's Automotive Trust work to advance car culture. And because of that relationship with America's Automotive Trust, we're able to share resources and operate very lean. We have a very, very small staff at RPM, and it allows us to dedicate the greatest amount of our donor dollars to the programs that we support. Our overhead is very, very low. The vast majority of our funding goes to those programs that we support.
And I would love to know, Nick, in the past, call it 3 to 5 years, how has it been going? I mean, you're doing all these wonderful grant programs and things of the sort. Are there a lot of young men and women out there who are wanting to learn these skills and taking those grants up? Or what has been the interest level kind of nationwide with your mission and everything that is behind it?
That's an excellent question. So, when you talk to shop owners, when you talk to people who have been in the industry for a long time, you kind of hear that same story of like, oh, the next generation isn't interested in cars. I can't get these kids off their phone long enough to get involved with cars. I am at odds with that statement. I believe that there is an interest, that we have students that are, getting into this industry, and they are going to be terrific, skilled craftspeople in this industry. We have to, as the people who are in the industry right now, we have to find ways to engage them and involve them in our industry. So the short answer is it's going very well. We have no shortage of people looking for the scholarship support. We are looking to get into internships and apprenticeships, but on a higher level, when we look out at the interest as a whole, we need to be doing more to engage that next generation. There was a terrific article, I think it was in Hagerty magazine, called Gates and Ladders. I don't know if you guys saw this. It was about the older generation putting up gates and pulling up ladders to the younger generation. An example would be, let's say you street raced when you were a kid, and that is what really sparked your interest in collecting and restoring cars. But now you say, well, that's not really, I don't like the fact that these kids have these tuner cars and they go buzzing down the road, and that was okay for me to do, but it's not okay for this generation to do. an example of a gate would be, I collect pre-war Fords, and those are considered collectible vehicles. So when a young person comes along and wants to talk to me and they've got, a 1996 Jeep Cherokee, I don't consider that to be part of the culture. We have to be open and welcoming to people who are interested in vehicles. Maybe it's not what excites us, but it's what excites them. If they like it, we should like it, and we should be inviting them into the culture and making them a part of it, because who knows, somebody who starts out with their 1996 Jeep Cherokee could come to an event, come over and look at that 32 Ford and say, geez, this is for me too. And when I reach that level where I can invest and get into this, this is what I'm going to look for. So by accepting what might not be your cup of tea, you could be growing the whole next generation of enthusiasts that are into what we're into.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, we have such crazy variety on BAT. We discover some of that friction from time to time, right? Like the car that sells for $7,200, is listed right alongside the 7-digit car, and it can be a different crowd. But there are some really fun and interesting people we have discovered in the BAT community that actually love both, right? And sometimes you wouldn't guess, but that $7,000 car might be being bought by a really well-heeled person that just like really enjoys diversity or something pulls at the heartstrings. So we see that quite a bit. And I think that hopefully BAT is helping foster a positive sort of influence on that. And honestly, frankly, we hear that there's, younger folks on BAT than we would ever anticipate. And I talked to, friends, like we started BAT when we were pretty young. We were in our 20s, but we're not anymore, right? 15 years later. But there are friends in my circle that, their kids are looking at BAT and like looking at the cars that are being listed because they think that it's interesting stuff and positive stuff to be able to see in terms of that variety. So I appreciate you saying that.
Well, one of the things that I really love about BAT is the comment section on the cars for sale, because you've got people that are on there that have vast amounts of knowledge. And a lot of times, just by scrolling through those comments, you learn a lot about the vehicles that are being featured on the website. So I can really imagine somebody, a young person who's a dreamer, who's really into these cars, jumping into the comments section, learning things about these vehicles that they never would have been able to find out just from, maybe a Google search. So it's a terrific aspect to the site.
Yeah, absolutely. And talking about variety of cars, like sometimes I think, there's a shortage of expertise out there for, pre-war, and brass era cars, right? But can you tell us a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of, either these shops that are reaching out to you or this broader need for talent? Does that eke up into newer era collectibles and classics as well? Or are you more trying to fill this void for the really old stuff where, the owners of those are, 80 and 90 years old, and the talent is sort of passing away in ways based on the years that have transpired?
Yeah, good point. We are focusing completely across the board. I mean, we have a shop in our network that exclusively does pre-war vehicles, and they rely on coach work and woodwork, and they're looking for people who can come in there and shape wood and learn all of these old techniques. And there is a surprising amount of interest among young people in that. I mean, sometimes that really resonates with a young person, especially we've got a young man in our network. His name is oh my God, I'm blanking on his name, but he's very well-rounded. He's just as good with woodworking as he is with engines and metal shaping. And he's somebody who will slot in perfectly into one of those shops. And he's, 22 years old. But we're also seeing shops that specialize in 80s and 90s cars. I just heard from a shop in Redmond, Washington, that does DeLoreans. And they're looking for somebody to learn that whole vehicle and come in. And this is an owner who has his eye on retiring someday. and wants to make sure that he has somebody to take over the shop when he retires. So there's need at every level. And the good thing is that, in this pool of talent, there's interest at every level. So we just need to find the people who match up interests with the need and connect them.
I would love to ask you more about the apprenticeship component. I mean, you had mentioned 3,000 odd restoration shops. So many of those are 1 or 2 man operations. And in many cases for marks and submarks, a lot of the really specialized knowledge is almost siloed with these guys who've been doing it for decades and decades. I mean, how are you going to find someone to rebuild a, Kotal pre-selector gearbox? I can name off the 5 or 6 guys who actually are, rebuilding, Ferrari V12 engines. So I think our audience would love to know, how do you link up these young men and women once they have the basic knowledge and skills to finally, find a destination for them to learn from the masters and eventually take over their book of business for them? How does that work?
Right, and that's the key, isn't it? Is finding those special people that can come into a shop like that and learn. And what I really stress is that there's a major difference between a student who is looking for a job and a student who's looking for a career. You've got plenty of students that want to go into automotive technology and collision repair, and that's wonderful. And that's good for them. They're usually going to work in a dealership. They've got a 9-to-5 job, and they're going to go home. And the students that we're looking for are the ones that are genuinely passionate about this. They're a part of that culture that I was just talking about, and they have to do this. They have to love what they're doing. They are looking for perfection in what they do. They're the ones that, after the teacher, finishes class, they're still there working on projects and making sure that they're getting it right. They're the ones that can't get enough of this. If you talk to any of the restoration shop owners, the thing that I hear over and over again is that more important than any level of education or experience is teachability and attitude. They're all looking for somebody who loves this enough to sit down, really pay attention, listen, and learn. And they all are looking for somebody who is teachable, who is going to fit into that shop, has a good work ethic, get along with everybody in the shop. So those are the students that we look for in the RPM network. We talk to a lot of young people. We ask them, questions about the field, what got them into this, and where their interest lies. And when we find those hidden gems, we connect them with the shops in our network. So from the apprenticeship point of view, what we first look for is a host shop that is willing to take on an apprentice, because like you said, a lot of them are very small operations. All of them are incredibly busy. So it's an investment to take on an apprentice. You can't just put them in front of a project and say, okay, I'll see you in a couple hours. There is, a certain amount of hand holding there, and there's labor involved in getting that young person up to speed. So it's a very special shop that is willing to put in that kind of work. So we first look for the shop that is looking for an apprentice and willing to participate in our apprenticeship program. We put together a task force of shop owners and educators to develop our own curriculum that is specific to restoration and preservation. So when we have the host shop, we give them the curriculum. We tell them, here's the task list that the apprentice will have to work through. And then we connect them with one of those above and beyond students that I was talking about. And the student learns that task list there in the shop. And depending on their level of skill when they come into the shop, if they're coming out of an established program where they already know a good amount of the tasks that we'd be teaching, you're looking at maybe 6 months for them to complete the curriculum at that point. But if they're coming out of just maybe a really, really competent high school level automotive technology and collision repair program, then our list will probably take closer to 2 years to get through. During that time, RPM is supplementing the apprentice with gap funding to make up for the difference in what they're making in the shop, because an apprentice is going to be paid at a lower level, and any kind of expenses, living expenses or that they might have. So we make it as easy as possible for the student to pursue a career like that by participating in the apprenticeship.
That's very interesting. You had mentioned auto shop class earlier. My high school did not have an auto shop class. I almost think of that as like home ec, as in terms of a past class it's almost being phased out. I mean, is that an accurate statement? What is kind of the broader state of middle and high schools offering auto shop and that whole deal? I mean, imagine a lot of our listeners probably have a lot of experience and opinions on that. I don't know if it differs between urban and rural environments in terms of access to those classes at a young age. And maybe this is almost a conversation at the state and federal level for funding for that type of stuff. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that component, because it seems like that would be maybe the easiest way to reach the broadest number of people to expose them to the trade.
It definitely is, and unfortunately, that is a very accurate assessment. The shop programs are closing down at what I'm going to describe as a disturbing rate. We have programs of our own, like I mentioned. We'll do what we can to introduce young people to the possibilities of a career in restoration. So those programs are things like lining up several restoration shops for tours that the students can go on, where they'll meet the shop owners, they'll meet the people who work there and get an idea of what working in that shop is like. We'll, like the Sonoma Speed Festival, we brought 8 students to that speed festival and showed them how to perform Concours level judging on 10 of the cars that were at the speed festival. Whenever we do a program like this, we reach out to the high schools and community colleges that have automotive programs to speak to the instructors to recruit students to participate in the program. We do this by, downloading lists of schools that have automotive programs. About, I'm going to say 25% of the time, when I reach out to a high school that, just 2 years ago was listed as having an automotive program, they tell me that the program has been shut down. Now, I'm not putting that out there as an official figure. We haven't done any research to that effect, but it's definitely a disturbing trend that we're seeing so many of these high schools close down their programs. And yes, that's a conversation at the probably the federal level, but at the local level, to make sure that the amount of funds are going into the right places so that we're not losing these skilled trade programs. And it's something that I'm hoping RPM can have an influence on at some point, but at the moment we don't have a solution for that in particular.
Circling back a little bit, you mentioned just sort of the fact that some of the students that you're looking for are the ones that stay late and are working on their own projects in the shop time and that sort of thing. I think that really parallels what Howard and I have seen in where those shop owners came from. So what I've always liked about this sort of industry is the way that you can eventually, start your own entity or be, some of these greatest shops, Paul Russell and Company and different sorts of stuff, they've got the owner's name on the side of the building. And like for young folks, you can go into the, car dealer world. I had a little bit of experience there and that sort of thing, but in restoration and in, more niche vehicles and different sorts of things, we have seen so many people sort of go through the ranks and then run the show themselves. And I think that would be an interesting and compelling dynamic to this sort of small business owner track and path that could be inspiring for young people. Do you see that as a message that resonates, or it's more just about getting people to, the entry is more the tricky narrative?
No, it's absolutely a message that resonates. Just about every young person that I talk to, because I always ask them, what's your long-term plan? Are you looking to, sharpen your craft and work for someone else? And is that going to be satisfying for you, or are you looking to run the show someday? And just about every single one says they want to run the show. And that had a significant impact on our development of the apprenticeship program. We want to make sure that while these students are learning the craft, they're also learning the business side, because being incredibly talented at shaping a fender doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be given the tools to run a business around that. So we've added to the apprenticeship program curriculum a lot of shop management tasks that the student will be learning in the shop. And this is two-pronged. It's to, if they do end up going on to a career, instill in them the abilities that they're going to need to be successful in owning their own shop. And then B, it also helps them have a greater understanding when they go to work in the shop, what's involved in running a shop. When you're sympathetic to that as an employee, you have a better relationship with management. We've talked to a lot of shop owners that say, well, when somebody sees our labor rate on the wall and then looks at their pay, they say, well, how come I'm not making that? I worked on the car and you're getting X amount of dollars per hour and I'm getting this much per hour. Getting them to understand that there's an entire back portion to owning a shop and running a shop and maintaining your own business, helps that employee-employer relationship. So that's one of the reasons we implemented that into the curriculum.
I think it's really, positive to talk about all aspects of that. And even the auto shop thing that you bring up, Howard, which I think is a really interesting conversation in and of itself. Where these young folks can go in terms of this business, then there's so many opportunities, whether you come up with interesting parts for cars and you have more of a sort of engineering mindset, or whether you're more into, so many events that are being run in these cars now. There's just so many ways that you can be a passionate young person in the automotive field, but then it all rolls back to keeping them running, right? That's where some of the most important roles are and skill sets are right there and important. So love the way that you're talking about all this and framing all of it. I think it's really informational and helpful for me to learn about all these aspects. Can you tell us a little bit about what brought you to be the executive director? Is this just an area of passion for you? Is this a side project and you're doing your own thing, or did it find you? How did that come to be?
A little bit of both. What I say a lot is, if the RPM Foundation had been around when I was in high school, my career would have looked completely different. I also did not have an automotive program when I was at high school, but always loved cars. I always loved anything mechanical. I was the kid who, took everything apart and then, tried to figure out how to put it back together, and drove my parents crazy because all of a sudden the TV's in a million pieces. So I always had that knack for it, but never even considered it as a career because the resources weren't there. So I went to the 4-year college. I studied communications. I actually wanted to be in radio. And, when I came out of college, there were no jobs in my field. So I worked for the family business. We owned a candy factory. And I did that for a few years. And then I just kind of picked up computers on my own and went into IT. And I did that for a few years. But all throughout all of that, I was always tinkering with cars. I bought a 1967 Firebird convertible when I was 1 year out of college and making $8 an hour in the factory. And every single one of my paychecks went directly into that car. And it just got worse and worse as time went by. So I finally, learned how to work on that car myself. And I, picked up motorcycles. I was always wrenching on something. So in 2007, I was laid off from my IT job. and we were in the middle of a recession. And my father, who had the candy stores and the candy factory when I was growing up, had closed everything down and went after his passion, which was classic cars. My dad, by the time he was married, my dad had owned over 20 different cars and always had those Auto Trader magazines next to his couch when I was growing up. So that's where I got the bug. Well, he pulled the trigger in 2004 and started this small dealership called Old Creek Motors. And he was a big Ford guy and brought in Fords and Mercuries from, the teens up to the 50s, but didn't really do a lot of the work himself. So when I got laid off, I had this severance package and I had nothing but time on my hands. So I started coming out to the shop every day and I would work on the cars with him and had a real knack for especially the old Ford flathead engines. Just love that engine. I know it inside and out now. And it was the first engine that I completely broke down and rebuilt myself. So when it came time to maybe look for another IT job, I said, well, I'd kind of like to stay here. So we did that together for about 7 years. We did mostly Fords and Mercuries, but we had all kinds of cars. We had a 54 Jaguar XK120 at one point. We had 1948 Oldsmobile 98 that had been put on, I think, a Cutlass chassis and had the big block Oldsmobile engine, and it just was this radical custom. So we did all kinds of different cars, and it was just the most fun I've ever had working in my life. My father retired a few years ago, and we were always a real small operation, so it was just the two of us. And when my dad retired, it was just me. So I missed being in a workplace with other people, and actually met somebody at a friend's house years ago who heard that I did cars, and she said, well, you need to meet Diane Fitzgerald, who at the time was the president of the RPM Foundation. So I met with Diane and we talked, and she said, we're looking for somebody to handle our grants program. And so I switched careers and worked doing the grants, which is just about the most rewarding job that you can do when you are looking at programs that are in need and finding them to be in line with your mission and providing them with the funds to assist them with their mission. It's incredible. It's incredibly rewarding to do. So when Diane retired, I was selected to succeed her as the executive director of the RPM Foundation. So that's only been a couple of months now, but I've been enjoying it. This is hands down the best job I've ever had in my life. And I love the mission. It really resonates with me. During the time that I was with my father doing the work that we did, we never did paint or body work. So we would always farm that out. And, seeing the struggles that the shops were having in keeping staffed up and keeping people working for them and finding new talent really primed me for going into this position. I've seen both sides of it, and I really, really understand it.
That's very interesting, and they're certainly lucky to have you at the helm, who's so passionate about all this. I'd love to ask you. You had mentioned some standout students that come to mind for you. I'd love to know, at that early age of 21, 22, 23 years old, are they focused on finding kind of what their specialty will be? Do you have people saying, I want to be an engine builder, I want to be a paint and body guy, I want to be, more basic service? Certainly part of that is kind of the runway for the career path. I mean, if you want to be, rebuilding small block Chevys, you're probably going to be up and running faster than if you want to be, fully restoring aluminum body European sports cars. So what have you found in terms of the kind of the motivation and pathway for these young men and women at that young age? Are they more just looking for the best opportunity that they can find, or are you seeing that they are set on a very specific specialty and craft that they want to pursue?
They're usually pretty set on a specific path. These are the workers that are doing this because they love it. So if, regardless of what the opportunity is, if they love shaping metal, they're not going to look at somebody who, can tune Weber carburetors and say, oh, they're making more money than me, I'm going to switch over to that. They are doing this because they love it. So by the time they reach us, they've usually gotten a taste of what they're good at, what they like, and they're usually pretty set on that. Now, that being said, we do have, I mentioned the student I was trying to remember before. His name's Sean Robinson. He's currently a student at McPherson College. Sean is good at just about anything. So he's somebody who's going to do very, very well in this field, because a lot of those shops are looking for somebody who is multi-talented and can wear a lot of hats. But, the larger shops that do have people who specialize in different areas, the students who are really, really good at something and really, really enjoy it, they're going to slot right into those shops and just excel.
You mentioned a college program that some people may or may not know about. McPherson College is referenced often in terms of this sort of space. But do you think, and do you find that what the shops want, and potentially a career trajectory for workers, are better if they go and put in several years in an accredited program like that, versus they go put in the same several years, call it, at Rod Emery's shop in LA, or a very notable restorer or service facility that is equally well known? Do you see us really needing more of those accredited education programs, or we need more placements of these people within the well-known shops to build their resume?
Well, this is going to sound like a cop-out, but we need both. We need more programs for sure. We need more seats. 100 students coming out of these programs per year is not nearly enough. There are students that learn well in a classroom, in a teaching environment, and then there are students that learn well in a shop environment. And there's not a lot that you can do to manipulate that either way. I talk to a lot of shop teachers, and they all say the same thing. The shop classes had a bad reputation of, this is where the problem kids get sent. And that's a negative stigma that we really need to remove. The kids that learn well in a shop class environment, they just learn differently than the students that excel in a classroom. They're tactile learners, and they are just as bright and talented as somebody who excels in algebra or excels in literature. They just learn differently. So that's why I give that answer. We need both. We need programs that can take care of students that learn one way, and we need shops that are willing to take on young people and guide them through their education a little bit more. That's why I come back to the apprenticeship program. The number one thing that is important to maintaining that program is finding the shops that are willing to take on the apprentice. If a shop has time to train, then terrific, wonderful. But a lot of these shops don't have the time to do it. And that's when we need the post-secondary programs to be there and get them shop ready, or as close to shop ready as they can, so that they can hit the ground running when they hit those shops. We need both types of shops to thrive in order for the industry to keep going.
I get asked all the time by collection managers or museum curators or dealers or any number of restoration shops, hey, Howard, we're looking for a young guy who knows about cars and is responsible and XYZ. And my response is usually, well, so are we. And if we find him, I want to hire him too, or her. So I'd have to imagine when you talk about these people who are shop ready that have come through your program, I'd have to imagine that people are bending over backwards to have the first shot at hiring them or bringing them on board. Is that generally the case, or it depends on the specialty or the region or other factors?
No, that's definitely the case. I've spoken with, so we have shops that come to us that are looking for students, looking for, either entry-level workers, they're looking for apprentices, they're looking for skilled workers. They're all, well, I shouldn't say that. The shops that have the right attitude about this are willing to pay the top dollar to bring talent in. And we just did an ad for one of the shops in Florida that is looking to pay $70,000 a year to one of the students, not a student, but a skilled, experienced mechanic to come into that shop. So there are rewards for sure if you can find the right shop. But yeah, the demand is definitely there, and there are definitely lots of opportunities for young people who want to pursue this as a career. There's no shortage of shops that are looking for labor. That's just about everybody in the industry right now.
Here's a question of a little bit different vein, but where does the money for RPM come from? Do you have corporate donors, I presume? Are they all in the automotive space, or are they out of the automotive space?
Yeah, good question. We are 100% donor funded. We have corporate donors, but we're also very, very strongly supported by the individual enthusiasts. So, however much we're doing, we always could be doing more. So we're always looking for more corporate partners. We're always looking for more interested individual parties that want to see this interest and these cars go on. So, we're actually up against one of our funding cycles right now. I've got 15 programs that need grant funding, and the more that we can do to support those programs, the more success we're going to see in moving the needle and getting this pipeline full of talented workers. So yeah, the mix is corporate and individual, but we've got good engagement from both. But we can always use more. We definitely are looking for more funding so we can do more things.
That makes sense. Yeah, thanks for your transparency on that. People always want to know. I'm sure that's one of the questions wrestling around in people's heads is how does this thing fly, and how is it managed, and how does it have the greatest impact, which I'm sure is your current charge as executive director. Give us the 10-year dream. If you're working there in that capacity for the next 10 years, where do you hope it is, and what do you hope the general landscape looks like that you guys are confronting in terms of impact in the next decade?
Oh my God, that's a terrific question. So it's going to take time to move the needle in the direction that we need to do. We are trying to get the students at a younger and younger age to be interested in this. So, I mean, there's a great program just outside of Detroit called Drive One. And the executive director of that program was the first person who said this to me, and it really resonated. It was right when I first started doing the job. He said, high school is too late. We need to be getting young people involved in this at 6th or 7th grade. We have to have a wrench in their hand by then, because by the time you hit high school, you already kind of have your interests lined up, and you're gonna start to gravitate towards those interests. And if automotive, if motorcycle, marine, if that's not your interest by then, you would stand less and less of a chance of getting involved. So looking at it from that perspective, it's going to take several years for us to engage them at a younger age to the point where we're casting this wider net and getting more people into the pipeline and starting to see a reaction. So I think for the next few years, we're going to have to be doing more of the same, more engaging students at that level, more supporting them, recruiting more apprentices, doing more to introduce young people into this interest and the industry. But eventually, when we're talking about the long-term plan, I would really love to see RPM as the solution to all of the different hobby and industry issues related to young people getting involved. At the club level, if you look at AACA and Antique Automobile Club of America and Classic Car Club of America, the median age of their members is probably 60, 70 years old. There's a need there for engagement at the youth level, and RPM is very well positioned to be that conduit between clubs and between the students. So we could be doing more to offer junior memberships in these clubs and putting together programs and events for young people to get interested in these clubs. One of the things I proposed is having the clubs bring in a group of students and have a tech session. If you can imagine Porsche Club of America, the local chapter, getting some automotive students together and teaching them how to, time horizontally opposed 6-cylinder. And this is going to be something that they've never seen before. And out of that group of students, maybe we're going to get 2 or 3 of those students who see that and say, oh gosh, I've got to do this for a living, or I've got to do this as a hobby. We could be doing more. We could always be doing more to engage the next generation. So when we're looking down the road, I want RPM to be that go-to solution for any aspect of the industry that wants to engage the next generation.
Fantastic. Thanks for laying that out for us. I'm excited for the next decade and what it has out in front of us for BAT and for things like RPM and how people will be getting involved with it. And I hope we can maybe do some more interesting auctions or things that can help you guys move your mission forward.
That'd be terrific. I hope so too.
Yeah, it will be a fun few years in the years ahead. So thank you for joining us, Mr. Nick Ellis. If people want to find you or get more involved with RPM Foundation, obviously you have the website there and you have social channels. There's some neat information and stories there. rpm.foundation, I think, is the URL. Is that right?
That is correct. rpm.foundation.
So people can find you there, and always an interesting topic. Thanks for spreading it out a little bit beyond RPM and what's going on in schools with young folks, what you're seeing. I think this is a conversation that we will probably have many chapters of. It will continue to evolve. Howard and I talk about this all the time, where we're going to take our latest broken car to go get it resolved, and like the status and the busyness of that shop where we go try to take it. It's a super interesting one. It impacts things all the way up the car food chain. So thanks for spending some time with us, and thanks for what you're working on there.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great talking with you both.
All right, Howard, we'll wrap it here, and we'll see everybody on the next BAT podcast.